A black woman in plain clothes walks into a bank to withdraw her own money, but within 8 minutes she's publicly humiliated, dismissed as a fraud, and then fires the branch manager on the spot. What she said next changed how that entire company trained its staff forever. This is a story you need to hear. But before we start, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that challenge assumptions and spark change. It was just an ordinary morning in Tucson, Arizona. She didn't pull up in a company car. No tinted windows, no driver opening the door with a clipboard in hand. She didn't wear a tailored suit with a bank pin on her lapel, didn't march in with an entourage, or announce her name in a booming voice. Instead, she stepped into the Monarch Federal branch off Speedway Boulevard wearing a navy blouse, soft gray slacks, flats that had seen too many airport floors, and a tired leather wallet clutched beside her keys. Her presence was unassuming. And that was the point. Kendra Braxton wasn't there to command attention. She wasn't looking to be recognized. In fact, she was counting on the opposite. There was something revealing, she believed, about observing a place when no one knew who you were. When people let their real selves show, unfiltered by protocol or hierarchy. She'd done this before, visits like shadows, slipping into branches unannounced, assessing more than operations, assessing character. The lobby was quiet. Almost clinically so, filled with the soft hum of fluorescent lighting and the faint tap of fingers on smartphone screens. A few customers lingered near the windows, an older woman writing in a checkbook, a man in a neon landscaping shirt chatting up a teller, someone flipping through a brochure about mortgage rates. No one looked up when she entered, and that was fine by her. She took her place in line behind the landscaper, who seemed to be making the teller laugh. Kendra waited patiently, smiling slightly as she looked around the room, taking in the subtle details. The motivational poster by the entrance was crooked. One of the digital displays had frozen. A fake plant by the coffee station drooped unnaturally to one side. Details. Small things, but telling ones. When her turn came, she stepped forward with a quiet confidence. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and composed. "I'd like to make a withdrawal from my personal account." The teller, a young woman named Sherry, according to her name tag, smiled and nodded. "Sure, I'll just need your ID and account number." Kendra handed them over without hesitation. But before Sherry could even scan the ID, a man stepped out of the glass-walled office to her right. Mid-50s, maroon tie, thin-rimmed glasses that didn't hide the practiced condescension behind them. He approached with the air of someone who saw himself as the final word in any room. "I'm sorry," he said, cutting across the quiet exchange. "We can't process that withdrawal today." Kendra blinked, caught off guard. "I don't understand. Is there an issue with my account?" He chuckled lightly, a sound that carried no humor. "Let's just say we've had incidents. People pretending to be someone they're not. Large withdrawals, fake IDs. You know how it is." "No," she thought. "I don't know how it is, not like this. My account is in good standing," she said calmly. "I can provide additional verification if needed." But he didn't ask for it. Instead, he leaned on the counter with an indulgent smirk. "We've had fraud attempts before. No offense, but we don't just take people's word for it. And honestly, this ID doesn't really look like you." There it was. That quiet shift in tone. The suspicion not based on evidence, but on instinct, his instinct. The gut feeling honed not by truth, but by bias. Kendra tilted her head slightly, keeping her composure. "It is me," she said. "I'm Kendra Braxton, CEO of this bank." A hush fell over the area around the counter. Sherry looked up sharply. A man waiting nearby turned his head slightly. Stephen, the manager, didn't budge. "Ma'am," he said, lips curling at the edge. "Let's not waste each other's time. You'll need to come back with proper documentation. Or better yet, set up an appointment next time." There was no anger in her face. Just a pause. A calculation. A moment of reflection that seemed to stretch across decades. Every boardroom fight she'd won. Every merger she'd led, every late night she'd poured into keeping this institution afloat. And yet, here she was, in front of one of her own branches, being treated as if she didn't belong. "Stephen," she said carefully, "did you actually check the account in the system before you came over?" He crossed his arms. "It's procedure. I don't need to check every ID to know when something feels off." Feels off. That was it. Not looks incorrect, not flagged for review. Just feels. Like her presence, her skin, her voice, it rubbed against whatever narrative he was comfortable with. The silence around them wasn't empty. It was loaded. Eyes from the other side of the lobby were now watching. Sherry's hands hesitated over the keyboard. "Stephen," she tried quietly, "maybe I should just—" "No," he interrupted, not even looking at her. "I've got this." He turned to walk back into his office, his authority punctuated by the click of his shoes on the tile floor. Kendra didn't stop him. Not yet. She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and stared at the screen for a moment. Not to rage. Not to make a scene. Just a call. But she didn't make it yet. Instead, she turned back to Sherry. "Do you see the name on that ID?" she asked gently. Sherry nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. Kendra Braxton. And when you enter that name into the system?" Sherry's fingers moved with uncertainty across the keyboard. Then her eyes widened. "I see, an executive account. CEO of Monarch Federal." She trailed off, eyes flicking nervously toward the manager's office. Kendra didn't gloat, didn't raise her voice. She just nodded once. "You didn't know I was coming," she said, "and I didn't want anyone to. But now that you've confirmed my identity, is there anything else you need?" Before Sherry could answer, the office door opened again. Stephen was back, clipboard in hand, still carrying himself like the authority in the room. "Is there still an issue here?" he asked, voice sharp, eyes darting between Kendra and the teller. Sherry opened her mouth but paused. Kendra stepped forward instead. "She confirmed my identity," she said plainly. "You can process the withdrawal now." Stephen sighed dramatically. "Look, lady." "Miss Braxton," Sherry interrupted. Stephen's eyes twitched. "I just checked," Sherry said. "The account confirms. She's the CEO." Something in Stephen's face shifted. From arrogance to confusion, then to something darker. Defensive. Angry. "Oh, so now we're just letting people play dress up," he snapped. "She walks in here with no assistant, no warning, dressed like she's shopping for groceries, and I'm supposed to just believe." Kendra didn't flinch. Didn't raise her voice. "I didn't realize wardrobe approval was part of the withdrawal process," she replied smoothly. "It's not about the clothes," he growled. "It's about protocol." "You didn't follow protocol," she said evenly. "You didn't verify my ID. You dismissed a valid customer and made a public assumption." "And now what?" he sneered. "You gonna tell me how to do my job?" "No," she said. "I'm trying to see if you're capable of doing it at all." His composure cracked. He turned toward the staff, throwing his arms out. "Can someone get this woman out of here before she causes a scene?" The tension in the room snapped like a wire pulled too tight. But Kendra didn't move. She made the call. Calmly. Deliberately. "Lorna," she said into the phone. "Patch me through to HR." "Yes." "This location." And she hung up. No drama. No outburst. But something irreversible had just started. The call had been made, and though no one in the room knew who Lorna was, or what HR would do, something shifted in the air as soon as Kendra Braxton lowered her phone. It was the silence that lingered afterward, not the kind that fills awkward pauses, but the kind that rolls in before a storm. A silence that whispered to every employee and customer in the room, "Pay attention. This moment matters." Kendra didn't move far from the teller's counter. Her posture remained still, composed, almost statuesque, like a woman carved from resolve. She wasn't just standing in that branch, she was occupying it. No longer an anonymous customer. No longer a question mark in a navy blouse. She was something else now. Something immovable. Inside the glass-walled office, Stephen Aldridge paced. He wasn't smug anymore. He hadn't closed his door, but it hardly mattered. He was pacing like he was behind bars. His shoulders twitched every time he looked up and met Kendra's gaze. The clipboard he'd been gripping earlier was now clutched tightly to his chest, more like a shield than a tool. He opened his mouth once, as if to speak again, then thought better of it. Sat down. Stood up. Sat again. At the teller window, Sherry tried to focus on her screen, but her fingers trembled slightly as they hovered over the keyboard. Kendra noticed. "Sherry," she said quietly, "you did your job. I need you to know that." Sherry looked up, a trace of guilt still clouding her young face. "I didn't know what to do," she murmured. "You followed the system. You paused when something didn't make sense. You stayed curious. That's more than most would have done." A man in a landscaping uniform leaned closer to another customer and whispered, "She's the CEO. For real." The other customer raised her eyebrows and stared at Kendra, now seeing not just a woman, but a story unfolding in real time. At the far end of the branch, a door creaked open. Dennis, the assistant manager, whom few people had noticed until now, stepped out. He was in his late 40s, balding, quiet. Not the kind to make waves. He glanced at Kendra, then at the tellers, then back toward Stephen's office. His eyes were calculating something. Whether to step in, whether to retreat, whether it was safer to stay neutral. But neutrality was already a choice. Kendra didn't look at him. Not yet. Another customer, a gray-haired woman with a floral blouse and a walking cane, approached Kendra from the side. "Sweetheart," she said gently. "That man was out of line. You okay?" Kendra turned and offered a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she said. "I'm handling it." The woman gave a single nod and shuffled back to her seat. That brief exchange wasn't loud. It wasn't revolutionary. But it meant something. The branch phone rang. A sharp, piercing tone that cut through the heavy silence. Corey, the male teller seated 2 windows down, reached for the receiver. "Monarch Federal, Speedway Branch," he said. His eyes flicked up. "Yes, one moment." He looked directly at Stephen. "It's for you," he said. Stephen hesitated, then walked stiffly over and took the phone like it might explode. "Stephen Aldridge speaking," he said, trying to inject some strength into his voice. A pause. Then another. His eyes moved to Kendra. "Yes. She's still here." Another pause. "Understood." He hung up. And just stood there. Something in him looked smaller now. Like a balloon 3/4 deflated. He turned and walked back toward the middle of the lobby, his every step sounding like a question he didn't know how to answer. "Miss Braxton," he said carefully, voice strained, "can I speak with you privately for a moment?" Kendra didn't move. "You had your moment," she said, voice quiet but diamond sharp. Stephen swallowed hard. "Maybe things got a little tense," he began, trying to recover control. "It's been a stressful morning, and—" "Stop," she said, and it was the first time her voice cut. The entire room froze. Sherry lowered her gaze. Corey didn't even pretend to look busy. Dennis folded his arms and watched like a man finally realizing he might have to choose a side. Even the customers, most of whom had been pretending not to listen, now sat rigid, ears open, eyes wide. "I don't want a speech," Kendra said. "I want accountability." Stephen's mouth opened. Closed. "You're seriously blaming me for following security protocol?" "I'm holding you responsible," she said, "for not following protocol. You refused to check my ID. You dismissed system verification. You made it personal." She took a step closer. "You decided who I was based on how I looked. Not because I gave you a reason to doubt me, but because you brought the doubt with you." Stephen exhaled through his nose. "I didn't mean to disrespect, but you did," she cut in. "And you did it in front of your staff. In front of your customers. And you didn't even realize it." He opened his mouth again, but this time she didn't stop him with words. She simply turned away. The front door opened. 2 figures in dark blue suits entered the branch. The man was tall, with a crisp haircut and an unmistakable air of authority. The woman beside him had a small folder tucked under her arm and a calm expression that belied the sharpness in her gaze. Kendra didn't need to turn to know who they were. "Marlene," she acknowledged softly. "Roland." The tall man, Roland Pierce, regional vice president, nodded. "We got here as fast as we could." "Appreciate it," Kendra said. They walked past Stephen without stopping. He started to speak, but Roland simply raised a hand without looking at him. "We've reviewed the branch footage," Marlene said. Her voice was gentle, but there was steel beneath it. "There's audio and visual. It's very clear." Stephen blinked. "I was doing my job," he insisted, now louder. "You can't just— You're not being terminated because she's the CEO," Marlene said, cutting him off. "You're being terminated because you disregarded verification protocol, demonstrated blatant disrespect, and created an unsafe environment for a client and your own team." A long silence followed. Kendra stepped forward, not to twist the knife, but to teach. "I could have walked in with an entourage," she said, eyes scanning the room. "Could have made a scene. Instead, I came in quietly to see how the branch really runs." She turned to Stephen. "And what I saw is how you treat someone you think doesn't matter." She gestured around the lobby. "They didn't know who I was. They saw it happen. Watched you dismiss me. That stain doesn't wash off. It spreads. I won't let that happen under my name." Stephen's shoulders dropped. He didn't speak. He looked like a man who'd just realized his career had been built on assumptions, and they had just collapsed beneath him. Marlene motioned toward the back. "Let's talk in the office." Stephen walked, slowly, clipboard still clutched, eyes to the ground. When the door shut behind him, no one said a word. Then Kendra turned to the staff. I'll speak with the team shortly, she said quietly. Please wrap up with your customers. She stepped away from the teller line, found a small chair near the far end of the room, and sat. Alone, for the first time since the morning began. But it wasn't reflection time yet. Not yet. That moment was coming. And when it did, every word she spoke would echo far beyond those walls. She sat in the break room, surrounded by vending machines humming with soft mechanical indifference, and the stale scent of burnt coffee lingering in the air. The chair beneath her felt oddly rigid, not from the design, but from the weight of what she carried into it. Decades of navigating boardrooms, dismantling biases one policy at a time, and still, here she was having to prove she belonged in a place she built. Kendra Braxton hadn't moved in 10 minutes. Not because she was paralyzed, not even because she was lost in thought, but because the silence, for once, was purposeful. Strategic. Her hands were clasped, phone face down on the round breakroom table, eyes focused on the floor as if reading some ancient code in the scuffed linoleum. She didn't need time to calm down. She wasn't angry. Anger would have been easy. She was disappointed. And disappointment, she knew, echoed much farther. Outside the break room, the branch was still suspended in a kind of moral freeze frame. No one had raised their voice. No one had stormed out. But something had ruptured, and that rupture was still pulsing beneath the skin of every employee. Every customer who had silently watched and now had to confront what they'd seen. Not because they were told to, but because they could no longer unsee it. A soft knock at the break room door broke the stillness. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't tentative. It was respectful. Come in, she said without lifting her gaze. The door eased open and Roland Pierce stepped inside, the regional VP who had worked alongside Kendra for over 15 years. He was a man of calm logic, capable of navigating the political calculus of any room. But now, even he looked off-center. You okay? He asked. She looked up, met his eyes. Yes, she replied. Just thinking. He crossed the room slowly, his usual commanding presence now softened, like a man not here to lead, but to listen. He sat across from her, adjusting his suit coat as he did so, more out of reflex than necessity. I've worked with you a long time, Kendra, he said after a pause. I've never seen you fire someone like that. On the floor. In front of everyone. I didn't plan to, she answered, voice level. Then why now? He asked. She leaned back slightly, not deflecting the question but letting it breathe. Because they needed to see it. Not read it in an email. Not hear about it in a debrief. They needed to feel the weight of a decision, in real time. That's what accountability looks like. No edits. No PR gloss. Roland nodded slowly. Some people upstairs might say you made it personal. Her eyes held his. It was personal, she said. And if they don't understand why, then they're part of the same problem. He didn't argue. Didn't retreat. He just sat in the truth with her. Do you think, he asked after a moment, he would have treated me the same way if I'd walked in today? She didn't even blink. You're 6'3", white, wearing a VP badge and a suit. He would have rolled out the red carpet. Roland exhaled through his nose. Yeah, he said quietly. That's what I thought. They sat for a moment longer, not in silence but in shared understanding. There were no more words to exchange. Just the unspoken acknowledgement that what had happened wasn't a glitch, it was a mirror. And now that the reflection had been shown, it couldn't be ignored. I'll handle the internal communication to the other branches if you want, Roland offered. No, Kendra said, standing. I'll do it myself. Not right away, but eventually. She offered a faint smile. Might even leave the suit at home again. Roland chuckled. Then I better be on my best behavior. You're safe, she said, and meant it. He left the room, and she was alone once again. But the solitude was shorter this time, interrupted by a soft knock. This one more hesitant. Miss Braxton? It was Sherry's voice. Everyone's kind of waiting. Kendra straightened, picked up her phone, and walked toward the lobby. She didn't rehearse what she'd say. She didn't need to. The employees had gathered in a loose semicircle near the teller windows. Sherry, Corey, the assistant manager Dennis, Leonard the older teller, who usually spoke only when necessary. Even the security guard had stepped inside, arms folded, watching. Kendra stepped to the center and paused, letting the moment settle before she spoke. I know this morning was unexpected, she began. But I need you to understand something, not just about what happened, but why it can't happen again. Every pair of eyes stayed on her. I've worked at Monarch Federal for 23 years. Started as an intern. Pushed papers. Ate lunch alone while managers walked by without a glance. I've been where you are. I am you. She looked at Sherry, who was visibly trying to keep her composure. When I walked in today, I didn't want to be treated like a CEO. I wanted to see how the branch runs when no one's performing. When people think they're dealing with just another customer. Her voice was calm, but each word landed like a hammer against glass. What I saw was a man make a decision based on assumption. No verification. No questions. Just judgment. Dennis, the assistant manager, shifted his weight, then raised a hand gently. Miss Braxton, if I may, he began. Some of us knew something was off, but we didn't know how to step in without overstepping. I understand, Kendra said. And that's exactly why I'm here. She stepped closer. It's not just about Stephen. It's about how we respond when we see something going wrong. Not just for our clients, but for each other. That hesitation. I don't want to overstep. That's what stops change before it starts. Corey cleared his throat. I've only been here a year, he said. But I've seen managers ignore people. Clients. Staff. I didn't want to be that person. But today I froze. I saw what he was doing to you, and I didn't say anything. You're saying something now, Kendra said. And that matters. Sherry added quietly. I knew something felt wrong. I just didn't know if backing you up would get me in trouble. It won't, Kendra assured her. Speaking up when someone is being mistreated, especially in a place of business, is never the wrong move. Leonard, the older teller, adjusted his glasses. To be honest, I think we've all seen Stephen act like that before. Just not to someone with authority. That statement hung in the air like smoke. Exactly, Kendra said. And if he talks to a CEO like that, how do you think he treats the clients no one notices? The elderly woman with a handwritten check. The immigrant family trying to open their first account. No one needed to answer. They already knew. I'm not here to discipline, she continued. I'm here to reinforce something we all say we believe in, integrity. That starts in here, she tapped her chest. And in here, she pointed to the floor. Not in slogans or ads or performance reviews. She took a breath. Moving forward, there will be mandatory training on respectful client interaction. I'll be sitting in on the first one myself. Because if we can't hold each other accountable in here, we have no business talking about trust out there. A slow ripple of agreement passed through the staff. Heads nodded. Shoulders relaxed. And then Kendra ended with something quieter but deeper. It's not about who you think someone is, she said. It's about treating everyone as if you knew they had the power to change your life. Because the truth is, they do. She gave them a final look, not as a CEO, not as a lesson, but as someone who had been there. Still was. Thank you for hearing me. And thank you for staying open to learning. That's how we grow. Not just as a bank, but as people. Then she walked away. No fanfare. No cameras. Just a woman in flats and a navy blouse who refused to let silence speak louder than truth. Kendra stepped out of the circle of employees and returned to the break room, not because she needed another moment of silence, but because there was still one more call she had to make, one she hadn't yet allowed herself to place. The kind of call that didn't involve titles or corporate chain of command. It was personal, and yet it was the root of why she had come in that day dressed the way she did, why she'd refused to announce her visit, why she'd watched silently while Stephen Aldridge unraveled in front of a room full of witnesses. She sat down again, unlocked her phone, and scrolled to a message saved in a folder marked simply, Flagstaff. The woman's name was Nadine. The story had arrived as a complaint email 6 months ago. Kendra had read it late one evening in her office, not long after closing the books on Monarch's third quarter earnings. Nadine's message had been respectful, measured, but something about its tone had stayed with Kendra longer than any balance sheet ever could. Nadine had written about her elderly mother, about trying to deposit a check on her behalf, about being told by the branch manager, firmly and repeatedly, that it wasn't possible because something didn't look right. No raised voices. No cursing. No escalation. Just the slow, grinding kind of humiliation that burrows under your skin and makes you question whether you're welcome anywhere. Kendra had flagged the complaint for internal review. The official report came back 2 weeks later. Protocol was followed. No corrective action recommended. And yet, she'd kept the email. She couldn't say why at the time. But now she knew. Because what Nadine had described, what so many brushed off as a misunderstanding or an isolated misstep, had played out again, this time with her. She tapped call and waited as the phone rang. A soft click, then a voice, tired, careful. Hello, Nadine. This is Kendra Braxton, CEO of Monarch Federal. A pause. A breath. Oh, I didn't expect, I know. I'm sorry to call out of the blue. But I wanted to thank you for writing to us, for sharing your story. Another pause. This time longer. I wasn't sure anyone ever read that email, Nadine said. I did, Kendra replied. And today, I lived it. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was a quiet confirmation between two strangers bonded not by coincidence, but by systemized experience. I'm so sorry that happened to you, Nadine said finally. Kendra nodded, even though Nadine couldn't see it. Me too. But it reminded me why we have to keep showing up. Not just in meetings or press releases. In the everyday spaces, where people let their guard down, where they assume you don't matter. They spoke for a few more minutes, no script, no executive polish. Just two women, both black, both familiar with the subtle blade of being seen as less than, until proven otherwise. When Kendra ended the call, something inside her felt resolved. Not complete, but grounded. She stood, walked out of the break room, and this time didn't turn toward the lobby. Instead, she took a quiet route down the side corridor and stopped in front of Stephen's office door. It was slightly ajar. She pushed gently and found Marlene still inside, her arms crossed, eyes focused. Stephen sat behind his desk, no longer defensive. He looked like a man who had just seen himself clearly for the first time, and didn't like what he saw. Marlene turned as Kendra entered. We were just finishing up, she said. Kendra nodded. I won't take long. Stephen didn't look up. You know what hurts the most about today, she said, speaking directly to him. He glanced up now reluctantly. It's not the assumption. I've lived with that my whole life. It's not the disbelief or the dismissal. It's that you didn't even look. Not really. You saw a person who didn't match your picture of authority, and you acted accordingly. Stephen opened his mouth, then stopped. She let the silence sit a moment before continuing. I could have walked away. I could have filed a report, had you quietly moved to another branch. That's how these things usually go, right? Out of sight, out of mind. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. But I didn't do that, Kendra said, because I needed them to see what silence enables, what inaction protects, and what truth sounds like when it's spoken aloud. She turned to Marlene. I trust your process. Whatever next steps you recommend, I support. Marlene gave a small nod. We'll begin a full audit of branch conduct and training procedures immediately. Kendra nodded once more and left the room. She didn't look back. Back in the lobby, the energy was different. More grounded. Less reactive. The staff had resumed their stations, but their movements were quieter, more deliberate. Customers came and went, each one greeted with eye contact, with care. It was as if the entire building had taken a deep breath and remembered what it was supposed to be. She glanced at the clock. Her time at the branch was nearly up. But before leaving, she approached the front desk and asked the receptionist, a young man named Elijah, for one final favor. Can you put me through to the internal intercom? She asked. Of course, he said, surprised but nodding quickly. Right now? Yes. Just a brief message. He handed her the mic, and the quiet buzz of the intercom clicked on. Hi, she said, her voice now echoing through the halls and back rooms of the branch. This is Kendra Braxton. I want to thank all team members for your patience and professionalism this morning. I'll be heading out shortly, but before I do, I'd like to say one last thing. If you have a moment, please meet me in the lobby. She handed back the mic, stepped away, and waited. One by one they came. The tellers, the assistant manager, the security guard, even a few back office staff. They gathered again in that same loose semicircle, though this time the atmosphere was different. Less tense. More open. Kendra stood in front of them without a script, without notes. Today could have been one of those bad days, she said. The kind you try to forget. The kind you tell your spouse about in one exhausted sentence. But it's not going to be that. She let the words land. Because today mattered. A few people shifted, shoulders lowered. I walked in this morning not looking like the person you see on a corporate flyer. And I did that on purpose. Because I needed to know what really happens here when no one's performing. What I got wasn't perfect, but it was honest. She looked at each of them, taking her time. And the truth goes beyond one manager's decision. It's how you responded. Some of you froze. Some hesitated. That's human. But now, you've seen what silence allows. And I hope you've also seen what standing up can create. She gestured gently toward Corey and Sherry, who stood side by side again. We talk a lot about leadership. Usually it sounds like strategy, metrics, performance goals. But real leadership? She paused. It looks like holding the door open for someone who's had a terrible morning. It looks like speaking up, even when your voice shakes. It looks like not being a bystander. Her voice softened. Sometimes leadership means doing the hard thing in front of everyone. Not because it's comfortable, but because people are watching, and you can either teach them fear or teach them courage. The room was still. Not with fear. With reflection. Stephen won't be returning, she said. That wasn't an easy decision, but it was a necessary one. Because if one moment like today is left unchallenged, it becomes normal. And normal becomes policy. A few nodded. One person swallowed hard. Another looked away, thinking. I'll be visiting other branches, she said. Not to test. To listen. And yes, sometimes I'll be dressed just like I was today. A ripple of soft laughter broke the tension. And if you ever find yourself unsure, ask one question. Would I treat this person the same way if I knew they could walk into a boardroom tomorrow and make a decision about my job? If the answer is no, then it's not the right way to treat them. She smiled. Not the CEO smile from press kits. A quieter, older one. A smile of someone who knew what it cost to earn respect and what it meant to fight for others to receive it too. Thanks for hearing me, she said. And thank you for staying open to learning. Because that's how we grow. Not just as a bank, but as people. And with that, she turned, picked up her bag, and walked out, not escorted, not applauded. Just a woman who had reminded a room full of others what dignity looked like when no one else was watching. The sun outside had shifted slightly by the time Kendra stepped through the glass doors of the Speedway branch. The afternoon light filtered in at a slant, casting long shadows across the parking lot, and for the first time that day, she let herself exhale, not out of relief, but out of awareness. The kind of awareness that doesn't dull after a confrontation, but sharpens after a reckoning. She didn't head straight to her car. Instead, she walked slowly along the sidewalk lining the building's edge, her heels tapping a quiet rhythm against the concrete. A few customers walked past her on their way in, some nodding politely, others recognizing her from the earlier incident and offering faint smiles of awkward sympathy. She returned them all with the same calm composure that had steadied her all morning. She stopped at the corner of the building where a small bench was tucked between two trimmed hedges. It was there for decoration more than function, but she sat anyway, taking out her phone, not to check emails, not yet. Instead, she opened the camera and snapped a photo of the branch sign with the afternoon sun behind it. Not for social media. Not for proof. For memory. Because today wasn't a headline. It wasn't a PR moment to be shaped or curated. It was a turning point. And turning points don't always come with trumpets and applause. They come in navy blouses and stiff chairs and the silence after someone says, I don't believe you. Kendra sat there for several more minutes before pulling up her internal communications app and composing a message to her executive assistant. Please prepare a memo, she dictated quietly. Title, Executive Visitation Policy Update. Going forward, unannounced branch visits will continue as part of our internal integrity initiative. No prior notice. No special accommodations. Rotational schedule to be developed. I will begin the next phase personally. She paused, then added, include language about re-emphasizing staff empowerment at the point of contact. Frontline integrity is frontline power. She sent it off, then finally stood, walked back to her car, and drove. But she didn't drive home. Instead, she rerouted toward a coffee shop on the outskirts of Tucson. Not the corporate chain kind, but a small, locally owned place she remembered from a visit years earlier. They served the best lavender honey lattes, and the windows were always open to let in the desert breeze. She needed space to think, not from the event itself, but from the weight of what it revealed. Inside the cafe, she found a corner seat near the window, ordered her drink, and pulled out her laptop. But the screen stared back at her blankly. Not because she had nothing to write, but because the words that needed saying couldn't be formatted into bullet points. Not yet. Instead, she reached for an old notebook tucked in the bottom of her bag. Not for notes. For clarity. She opened to a fresh page and wrote one word at the top, pattern. Because that's what she'd seen. What happened that morning wasn't an isolated failure, it was a pattern. A pattern that revealed itself in glances too brief to capture on camera, in tones too practiced to raise alarm, in decisions made without pause because they felt right to the people making them, even if they were wrong. The problem with patterns, she knew, was that they didn't always scream. They whispered, quietly enough that those in power could pretend not to hear them. But she heard it now, loudly. She began writing. A list. Not of names or titles, but of branch locations, prior complaints, subtle inconsistencies in customer retention data, places where the metrics looked fine on paper, but the feedback felt off. She didn't need a task force. She needed to follow the friction. Somewhere near the bottom of the list, she added, Albuquerque, first visit as regional director. Asked if I was lost. Then she drew a line under it, not to separate but to connect. That moment had lived quietly in her memory for years, unspoken, unresolved. Today had forced it back to the surface. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her older brother Marcus, a retired Air Force mechanic and part-time community mentor. Heard what happened? You good? She stared at the screen for a moment, then typed, Yeah, but it wasn't just about me. Never is, he replied. But I'm glad it was you. You made them see it. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked out the window at the dusty hills in the distance, their edges softened by time and heat. Her brother was right. It had to be her. Because if she, as CEO, couldn't break the illusion of neutrality, then no one else stood a chance. As she took a sip of her latte, her mind drifted back to Corey's face, the realization dawning on him when he recognized her, not just as a figurehead, but as a human being deserving of dignity. She thought of Sherry, who had typed her name into the system with shaking hands and found the truth for herself. That was the real shift. It wasn't Stephen's firing. It was their seeing. That was how systems changed. Not by decree, by awareness. She opened a new page in her notebook and wrote, Awareness, discomfort, action. It wasn't a perfect formula, but it was a start. The discomfort part was essential. Without it, awareness stayed passive, safe, disconnected. Discomfort made it real, made it urgent. She closed her notebook and opened her laptop again. This time, the words came easily. Subject, Reflections from Speedway Branch Visit to Senior Leadership Team Body. Today, I made an unannounced visit to our Speedway branch in Tucson. I arrived without credentials, without a suit, without signaling my status. I was denied service. I was accused of impersonation. I was dismissed. I was also seen. Not immediately, but eventually. The purpose of this email is not to recount the incident in detail. That report will come through the proper channels. This message is to set a tone. Leadership cannot afford to operate on curated visibility. We must be seen unfiltered, especially by the people who serve our clients face to face. The problem wasn't the refusal. It was the refusal to check. I don't want apologies. I want accountability. I want every branch to know that who a customer appears to be is not a justification for shortcuts. We will be revisiting training. We will be reinforcing behavioral accountability. But more than that, we will be shifting culture. Bias, when baked into daily routines, becomes protocol. Our job now is to unbake it. I will lead this effort. Personally. Kendra, she hit send. Then she leaned back, closed her eyes for a moment, and let the low hum of conversation around her fold back into the quiet part of her mind that always knew this day would come. Because change doesn't start when the cameras arrive. It starts when no one is watching. And that's where she had chosen to stand. 2 weeks had passed since the incident at the Speedway branch. And yet the ripples from that morning had not slowed. They had spread, amplified, reshaped everything they touched. The story had moved beyond quiet HR memos and executive roundtables. It had found its way into the bloodstream of Monarch Federal, not as gossip, but as a reckoning. And Kendra Braxton was not letting the momentum fade. She had since visited 3 more branches, all without prior notice, dressed like a regular customer, plain sweaters, jeans, simple crossbody bags. No visible signs of rank or authority. She didn't do it to test anyone, at least not in the way most people expected. She did it to observe how her company breathed when no one was performing. She did it to remind herself of how fast perception could become policy, and how subtle disrespect could calcify into systemic failure. She kept no press team with her. No assistant trailing behind her with a tablet and agenda. She carried a notebook in one hand and her ID in the other. And she watched how people spoke to her, how they addressed others who looked like her, dressed like her, didn't look like her. And every visit revealed more of the truth. The branches that thrived weren't the ones that had the sleekest decor or fastest turnaround. They were the ones where respect wasn't performed. It was practiced. It was during her unannounced visit to the Mesa branch, a location she hadn't set foot in since her days as a junior operations officer, that something unexpected happened. She walked in and was immediately greeted by a middle-aged man in a crisp white shirt and navy cardigan. He smiled without hesitation, stood from his desk, and asked, "How can I help you today?" "I'd like to make a withdrawal," Kendra replied, handing over her ID and account number as she always did. He scanned the documents, glanced at her, then did something not one other manager had done in the first few seconds. He looked back down at the screen and read, "Verified." Then he paused, looked up again, this time more carefully, and said, "Miss Braxton, welcome back." His voice wasn't surprised. It wasn't overly reverent. It was warm, familiar, rooted in a kind of recognition that went beyond her title. "I was wondering how long it would take for you to drop in," he added. "We've been watching the internal updates closely. Lots of conversations happening lately." "Have there," she said with a raised brow. "Good ones," he replied. Uncomfortable, but good. Kendra allowed herself a small smile. "That's the only kind that matters." He nodded. "Would you like to see the branch today, or just observe?" She glanced around. The energy was balanced. Staff were engaged, customers were being greeted by name. She saw a teenager being walked through her first checking account by a young teller who treated her like a future partner, not a current inconvenience. That moment alone felt like a kind of answer. "I think I've already seen what I came for," she said. But before she left, the man, whose name tag read Reuben, branch manager, asked a question that caught her off guard. "Can I share something with you? Off the record?" She nodded, curious. "I used to think fairness was automatic," he said. "That if you just treated people equally, things would work out. But I've come to learn that equal isn't always equitable. Some folks walk in carrying more weight than others. More scrutiny, more assumptions. And if we don't acknowledge that, we become part of the problem." Kendra met his gaze. "You're not wrong," she said. He smiled. "Didn't think I was." She left the branch without fanfare, but her heart carried something different this time. Not exhaustion, not even vindication, but hope. Because it wasn't just her voice anymore. It wasn't just her fight. She drove straight back to headquarters, parked without using the executive spot, and made her way to the 8th floor conference wing where a team was preparing the next training rollout for all Monarch federal branches. The room was filled with training designers, HR liaisons, culture analysts, and a few branch representatives who'd been invited to lend real-world insights. Kendra stepped in, surprising everyone. "Keep your seats," she said as chairs began to scrape the floor. "I'm not here to supervise. I'm here to contribute." She took a seat at the far end of the long glass table and opened her notebook. "Tell me where you are," she said, not demanding, but inviting. The lead designer, a young woman named Tasha, who had joined the company less than a year ago, spoke up. "We're reframing the protocol content," she said. "It's not just about process anymore. We're incorporating human-centered scenarios, ones that reflect real decisions, not just policy compliance." Kendra nodded. "And who's leading those sessions?" Tasha hesitated, then said, "Branch leaders, initially. But we're proposing peer-led reinforcement groups after each module." Kendra looked impressed. "Good. What else?" Another woman raised her hand. "We've developed a reflection loop at the end of each session. It asks employees to identify moments where they could have responded differently in past situations, real or hypothetical. Are those responses shared? Privately first, then optionally within small teams if they're comfortable. Build in accountability follow-ups," Kendra said. "One-on-one check-ins with a mentor or peer who can revisit those reflections a month later. Learning doesn't end in the training room. It lives in habits." The room was silent, attentive. They weren't just taking notes, they were recalibrating. And then Kendra asked the question that she hadn't asked in any boardroom before, not like this. "How are you measuring courage?" The silence deepened. Everyone talks about measuring performance. But how are we measuring courage? How do we know if someone spoke up, stepped in, took a risk on behalf of a colleague or a client? Tasha sat back, clearly turning over the question in her mind. "We don't really," she admitted. "Start," Kendra said. "Not with metrics, with stories. Create a confidential channel where staff can anonymously share moments of moral courage, times they did the hard thing or watched someone else do it. Let those stories become the soil where new values grow." By the time the meeting ended, the entire room felt transformed, not overwhelmed, activated. Kendra walked out with her notebook tucked under her arm, but this time, she wasn't carrying it alone, not metaphorically and not emotionally. Outside the conference room, she bumped into Corey from the Speedway branch. He looked startled. "Miss Braxton, I didn't know you were here today." "Neither did I," she said with a smile. "How are things back at Speedway?" He gave a slow nod. Better. Different. We had a roundtable last week. Talked about what happened. A lot of folks admitted they froze. Some said they'd been Steven once or twice, without realizing it. And how did that feel? Terrible, Corey said. But honest. That's the only kind that changes anything, she replied. Then he asked, almost shyly, do you think I could apply for the team facilitating the new training? I've been working on something I want to share about employee-to-employee accountability. Kendra didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Send it to Tasha. She'll know what to do with it. Corey's smile was a mix of pride and disbelief. Kendra turned to go, but before she did, she added, courage isn't about never being wrong, Corey. It's about choosing not to stay wrong once you see it. As she walked away, Corey stood taller, and Monarch Federal, little by little, began walking differently too. It was a Thursday morning when Kendra Braxton found herself back in the conference room that overlooked downtown Phoenix, the city where she had first cut her teeth in banking. The skyline beyond the glass had changed, taller buildings, sharper silhouettes, but her reason for being here hadn't. It was the 7th week of what Monarch employees had quietly started calling the Braxton Cycle, a rotation of real-time CEO visits and truth-centered leadership forums that replaced monthly reports and sanitized all-hands memos with something far more disruptive: honest conversation. What had started with a denial at a single branch had now become a cultural blueprint. And today, for the first time, Kendra wasn't the one doing the talking. She sat in the second row, not at the front, with a pen in hand and her notebook open. Across from her, on a raised panel, stood 3 employees she'd never met until recently: Sherry from the Speedway branch, Ruben from Mesa, and a new face named Amir, a branch analyst from Santa Fe. None of them wore suits. None of them spoke in jargon. But all 3 had stories, and today, those stories were the curriculum. I froze, Sherry said into the microphone, her voice steady but vulnerable. When I saw the manager dismiss her, I froze. Not because I didn't know something was wrong, but because I didn't know if I'd still have a job if I called it out. She paused, looked around the room. It was full, standing room only. I think that's what we need to talk about more. Not just the right thing to do, but what it costs to do it. A low murmur of agreement moved through the crowd. Ruben picked up the thread. What I've learned is this: leadership isn't just about what you do when you're being watched. It's about what you permit when you're not. Every time we say nothing, we teach permission. Amir nodded. And every time we center comfort over courage, we reinforce a system that was built to survive silence. Kendra's pen slowed. She wasn't taking notes anymore. She was just absorbing. This wasn't performative culture change. This was the result of seeds sown with intention and watered with discomfort. The panel continued, transitioning from testimony to tangible frameworks: peer accountability circles, anonymous reporting tools not for punishment but for pattern recognition, monthly role reversal exercises where managers were required to shadow frontline staff and vice versa. And then something remarkable happened. A man in the back row, mid-40s, buttoned up, regional director badge on his lapel, stood up and said, "I think I've been Steven." The room froze. He continued, "Not in the yelling, not in the dismissiveness, but in the assumptions I've made. The way I've handled complaints differently based on who filed them. I never meant to, but I see it now. And I just want to say, I'm sorry." No one applauded, but no one judged him either. Instead, Kendra saw something extraordinary. Sherry stepped off the stage, walked to the back, and offered the man a quiet handshake. No fanfare, just human repair. That, Kendra realized, was the shift they had been waiting for. Not perfection, ownership. After the session, she lingered in the hallway longer than usual. A few employees came up to thank her. One handed her a folded piece of paper with the words, "Thank you for giving us permission to feel and still be heard," scrawled in handwriting that looked rushed but sincere. Another, a janitor in uniform, stopped her near the elevators. "I saw the video from that day," he said. "The branch footage. They showed it in training. I just want to say it mattered. Seeing you stand there, that mattered." She didn't know what to say at first. So she simply said, "Thank you for seeing it." Later that evening, after most of the building had cleared, she returned to her office. It was quiet, the kind of quiet only found when fluorescent lights are off and sunset pours in sideways. She stood at the window for a long time, watching as the streetlights flickered on one by one. On her desk was a folder, unmarked, but she knew what it contained. A compilation of customer feedback collected since her first visit to the Speedway branch. Not just complaints, Reflections. One in particular stood out. It was handwritten, mailed in the old-fashioned way, no return address. I walked into a branch a week ago with my autistic son. He doesn't like waiting, and he flaps his hands when he gets nervous. I used to get glares, sometimes whispers. But this time, someone knelt down, offered him a paper to color, and didn't treat me like I was inconveniencing the world. I don't know what's changed at Monarch, but I felt like I belonged. Please don't let it stop. Kendra read the letter twice, then closed her eyes and let it wash over her. Not as praise, but as evidence. That change was not a campaign. It was a commitment. She picked up her phone and opened the group chat she'd created with her direct leadership circle. Normally, she reserved that space for quick logistics updates. But tonight, she typed something different. We're not rebuilding a brand. We're restoring humanity. Let's make sure we never forget the difference. As she prepared to leave, she turned back to her desk for one last thing. Her old notebook. The one with pages now filled with names, branches, notes, reflections, sketches of new protocols, and on the first page, a single word that had started it all. Pattern. She flipped to the most recent entry, where she had written just hours earlier, pattern break, when people speak before they are asked. When they act without waiting for permission. When culture stops being a backdrop and becomes the practice. She closed the notebook, not to put it away, but to carry it with her. As she exited the building, she didn't take the executive elevator. She took the stairs, one step at a time, like every good change. Quiet, deliberate, and unstoppable. 3 months after the day Kendra Braxton was denied access to her own account, the company stood at a moment unlike any it had faced in its nearly century-long history. Not a moment of crisis, but of transformation. It was not born of a marketing campaign, nor a shift in strategy dictated by quarterly profits. It was something deeper, more human. It had started with a silence, a refusal, a mistake, and it had grown into a movement. Kendra didn't just carry the weight of that change, she had become the symbol of it. But symbols, she knew, were fragile things if not sustained by substance. And substance required follow-through. She had promised herself, and her people, that the Speedway branch incident would not be a footnote. It would be the first page of a new chapter. That morning, she stood before the full national leadership team in the Grand Assembly Hall at Monarch Federal's headquarters in Chicago. It was the annual summit, once a place for numbers, forecasts, and carefully staged applause. But this year, everything was different. The stage had no podium, no branded banners, just a circle of chairs arranged as equals. The PowerPoint decks were gone, replaced by real people and raw voices. Kendra entered without fanfare. No one rose. That was the rule now. She wasn't here to be admired. She was here to be heard. And more importantly, to listen. She took a seat in the circle and allowed a moment of stillness to settle. Then she began. 3 months ago, I walked into one of our branches and was treated like a threat to the very institution I helped build. Her voice was calm. Not rehearsed, remembered. I was not loud. I was not dressed in any way that suggested disorder. I showed my ID. And I was dismissed. No one moved. I could talk today about the policies we've rewritten since. The training programs, the listening tours, the cultural audits. I could give you metrics, charts, but I won't. She looked slowly around the circle. Because what this company needs now isn't data. It's understanding. And understanding requires a story. There was no rustle of papers. No tapping keyboards. Just eyes. Locked onto her. Not my story. Not anymore. You've heard mine. Today I want you to hear the ones I've been carrying since. She reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of printed letters. Some typed, others handwritten, folded in thirds, smudged with ink and emotion. Over the past 90 days, our team has collected over 2,000 stories from clients and staff, some shared openly, others anonymously. They were not requested. They were offered. That's what happens when people believe their truth will be held, not judged. She passed the stack around the circle, and as each person read silently, a hush fell over the room. A teller who shared how she had once let a customer leave in tears because she didn't know how to challenge her manager's tone. A veteran who walked into a branch and was asked, "Are you sure this account is yours?" because his name had been flagged as unusual. A former intern who finally admitted he left because he never saw another employee who looked like him in leadership and didn't believe he'd ever get there. When the papers returned to her, she placed them carefully on the floor beside her chair. "I want to talk to you today about what we call the cost of comfort," she said. That cost is not financial. It's moral. Every time we allow comfort to shield us from confrontation, we pay for it in trust, in talent, in humanity. She looked up, and we've been paying that bill quietly for years. Someone exhaled across the room. Not loudly, but the sound carried. There's a term I've started using with our team, Kendra continued. It's not in our manuals. It's not on our balance sheets. But it defines everything we do. It's called invisible harm. She stood now, not towering, just present. Invisible harm is what happens when we let subtle disrespect pass because it wasn't loud enough to be labeled offensive. It's what happens when we promote the employee who gets things done, even though their team is terrified of them. It's when we say they didn't mean it that way instead of asking, but how did it land? She walked slowly around the inner ring of chairs. Invisible harm accumulates. And the tragedy is, we often don't see it until it becomes visible in someone else's pain. She stopped and looked directly at one of the regional leads, a woman named Tiana, who had been silent all morning. Tiana, would you be willing to share what you wrote in your story submission? Tiana's eyes widened, but she nodded. Her voice was soft but clear. I wrote about my first year here. When I corrected a senior executive in a meeting and was pulled aside afterward and told I needed to be softer in my approach. I watched male colleagues interrupt and challenge ideas all the time. No one said a word to them. She folded her hands in her lap. I stopped speaking up after that. For 2 years. Kendra nodded. And what changed? You did, Tiana said. That day at the branch. It reminded me that silence is something we learn. But so is courage. Kendra sat back down. Thank you, she said simply. Then she turned to the room. That's the real summit agenda today. Courage relearned. Not just for those who've been silenced, but for those who need to unlearn the safety of silence. A long pause followed. The kind of pause where something unspoken shifted between people. Then Kendra added one final thing. There's a new initiative I'm launching today. It's called When No One Is Watching. Every quarter, a member of the executive team will shadow a frontline worker without disclosing who they are. They will listen. They will observe. And they will report, not just on process, but on presence. How people show up when they believe they're unseen. She let that sit. Because if we can't lead with integrity in the moments no one documents, we don't deserve to lead at all. The room erupted, not in applause but in motion. People leaned forward. Some took notes. Some simply closed their eyes and breathed deeply. And that was enough. Later that afternoon, Kendra stepped outside alone and found a quiet bench near the back courtyard. The air was crisp with early fall, the kind that made even the most urban spaces feel sacred. She opened her notebook to the final page. She wrote, "Leadership is not who salutes you in the spotlight. It's how they speak about you when you leave the room. Today they spoke with truth. Tomorrow we build with it." She closed the book, not because the story was over, but because it had finally begun. And somewhere, at some small branch in a town she hadn't yet visited, she knew someone would walk in with shaking hands, unsure of whether they would be seen, heard, or simply tolerated. And she knew, because of what had happened, because of what was still happening, they would not be turned away. Not this time, because the suits were off. The silence was broken. And the truth? It had found its voice.